Today I want to talk about this important, reoccurring issue that vexes many preachers, especially in the early years, and that is nervousness. Now, don't think you're alone if you're nervous. In fact, most preachers that I know of are nervous before every event, every preaching event in which they are engaged. It's quite normal to be nervous. It is ubiquitous among preachers. There is no one who escapes it. And let's remember, even the Apostle Paul, who was known for his boldness, faced the same thing, for he said in 1 Corinthians chapter 2, "When I came to you, brothers, I did not come with eloquence or superior wisdom, as I proclaimed to you the testimony of God. For I resolved to know nothing among you except Jesus Christ and Him crucified. I came to you in weakness and fear and with much trembling." Weakness and fear and much trembling. That's exactly what I hear most say, what I heard myself say, and still hear myself say when I'm nervous. Now, we'll talk a little bit about nervousness and what to do about it, but the first principle to understand about nervousness is that nerves are not a problem. It's your fear of being nervous that causes your chest to tighten, your voice to get smaller, and your gestures to become tight. And the more your chest becomes tighter and your movements become tighter and your voice becomes shallower, the more you become alarmed. And it accentuates, it perpetuates the fear. Being nervous is never a problem. Being afraid of being nervous is the problem. The difference between experienced preachers and you is they simply stop being afraid of being nervous. Now, the two are not the same. Nerves are an important function in the life of a speaker because they provide adrenaline. They provide energy that you may not actually have. You may have had a difficult night sleeping. You may have stayed up very late preparing because the sermon wasn't quite right. And now your nerves are really your best ally because they will give you energy. If you are frightened of that energy, then it works against you and it tightens you up and you deliver poorly. But if you're not afraid of it, then you can work with it and let it help you. Now, there are some things that can be done that you should do if you're truly nervous. One, the most important thing that I've read in any book on preaching is if you are nervous when you get up to preach, get up, stand before your people with good posture, and your first paragraph, your first thing you do ought to be a grand gesture. And the nervousness begins to, instead of being local, it begins to diffuse and work with you. Use grand gestures on purpose, and suddenly that nervous energy will help you. Secondly, it's something about how you think. When you're nervous, you must remember this is not just you. In our theology of preaching, we've been saying the living Christ is the one who speaks from the basis of the kerygma, which is the message about Jesus Christ, through and in and around the words of the preacher, and affect the hearer so that what is heard is indeed the Word of God for them. The living Christ is at work. I have a picture in my office that you'll see when we have our online classes, our virtual classes, and it shows a preacher, by the way, painted by DiCiani. It shows a preacher, and behind him, in the shadows, so to speak, are pictures of the various prophets going all the way back to Jesus. And that preacher preaches boldly because he knows he stands on the authority of ones who are greater not only than he, but everyone in that room, no matter how large put together. In other words, you and God are always a majority in any size crowd. When I get up to preach, I don't envision me trying to persuade people. I envision myself as standing in the place where God would have me, and there the divine authority behind me is really at work. Now I gain some confidence, and any nerves that I have become assets. So remember, it's not your nerves, it's your fear of nervousness. When you are nervous, consider it an asset. Diffuse it by using broad gestures. Remember that you are standing in the place of someone who put you there in his stead so that he might do his greater work than what you are doing. And indeed, God will use you. Now there's little things too. That Haddon Robinson, for example, advocates that if you're nervous, to loosen up your throat area, which is important to keep your larynx loose, to simply roll your tongue to the back and to the front several times while you're waiting to preach. It just kind of, that exercise loosens it up by nature. I too work on my larynx, and I use a lot of Hall's cough drops. And those cough drops just kind of keep it very lubricated. And I drink water before I preach, not while I preach so much, but before I preach, so that it's good and moist, and that helps keep it loose. When you're nervous, it does tend to perhaps dry it out a little bit. It's a psychosomatic effect, and so work with that. But the biggest issue is, don't fear it. Consider it an asset, an ally to you. And I think you'll find that nervousness is simply part of a preacher's life. Being afraid of the nervousness is part of the life of a preacher that requires maturity. The sooner you understand that, the more likely you're going to overcome the fear of being nervous. Well, God bless you as you preach.